What is up, down, and sideways, all you beautiful individuals? There's another epi of League Unlock here. We're here with you beauties, and we are just continuing to ride the high that is the GenG T1 rivalry. So much so that we're going back in time looking at not necessarily the biggest plays, but the biggest moments that have happened throughout this storied LoL eSports rivalry, whether that's a big elimination match, a championship match. There's no question these two have probably played the most high-stakes games head-to-head of any two organizations.
And I'll be honest, when we were, theorizing about this as an idea for a show and everything, I was thinking purely off of the history that I've come to expect of T1 and GenG. And I've been, when I look back in the memory bank, it's a lot of old memories, and a lot of those old memories, very T1 favored, and very much so I was excited to do this list until I realized, wait a minute, a lot of this recent history has big moments that go the way of GenG. So there's more than enough on both sides of the plate for both of these teams.
Yeah, there's positives and negatives for both sides for sure. And of course, there's multiple rebrand renames throughout here, going from the Samsung era, SKT, GenG, T1, but we're starting in 2020, which unfortunately is a COVID era matchup, but we're going to the Gauntlet Finals. This is T1 and GenG, the proper organizations, and this is where GenG 3-0s T1 to deny them a shot at the World Championship. This is a ruler BDD era GenG, and this was the messy T1 era of Guma splitting sometime with Teddy. Elam is in there, Kana's in the top lane, and the consensus after this series was GenG's the better team and deserved to go to Worlds.
I think this is a really crucial moment within the history of the LCK, as you outlined. Pretty much the, swap of a lineup that became that T1 iteration that year round, where you still had, of course, star players and people that would become star players for the organization, but finding the right mixture, fielding that correct 5-man roster was never really something that came through, I think, in consistency. And of course, it's important because anytime you are denying T1 an opportunity to hit the international stage, that's a big deal, not just for your region, but for the whole world watching and paying attention to this one. So make no mistake, this was a big time moment for, GenG, Samsung Galaxy to get this type of result and deny T1 that opportunity.
And this was, again, after that 2019 resurgent year of T1 where you're kind of expecting them to be back at the top, but we have this full roster overhaul with everybody but Teddy and Faker coming through this. So, yeah, it was messy for them, and obviously viewership takes a hit at any World Championship where T1 is not going to be there, but absolutely, as we mentioned, it was GenG deserving of being that team to advance. T1, of course, got the revenge many other times. We jump ahead to what was really them coming back to the top, starting to establish a new dynasty, and that is 2022 spring. We're going to the finals where they take down GenG, and this is the ZOFGK lineup being established. These are your cemented starting 5. This is the perfect 18-0 regular season into winning that spring split. This is when, people kind of put the mark as, oh, the dynasty's back.
Crazy. This isn't the best record that we're going to talk about on this type of list, which we're talking about a perfect split, a championship split at the end of it all. How can it get better than that? Well, when you're dealing with squads like GenG and T1, the pinnacle is only the next goal to topple over, to take down in your sights. This was obviously a big one at the time, and of course, with the record at that moment being broken, but really more so just about this, a very emphatic statement that T1 was going to be back, and not just back, here or there, sporadically, occasionally popping up. This was a T1 that was geared back up to be in the prime form that we had ever seen from that organization. And luckily for us as fans, they did hit that, and they hit that and more so. But when you're looking back on the history of this run, of this lineup for T1, you got to look back at this split and look at these finals and really celebrate.
And obviously it ends up being a disappointing run at MSI for this squad, but heading throughout this entire split, I think everyone thought, wow, GenG is an amazing team and like a world's contender. But T1's going 18-0, and the team fighting that they were able to do, pull things from the jaws of defeat, were really something we haven't seen since this split. And obviously there were many other peaks that this iteration of T1 has hit, but this was kind of the first signs of just the raw talent that all these young players had around Faker.
You could finally fully envision the all-star dreams that you had about these players, a year, 2 years ago prior, and seeing it come to fruition on the most popular, the most exciting organization within League of Legends. It was a story to be had, and certainly is one when you look back on it. I think you're going through, peak debut type of runs for guys like Zeus. You're looking down into the bottom lane and fully feeling and experiencing what type of player and game breaker someone like Kyria is for this T1 team. Really saw that result throughout this incredible perfect split.
Yeah, obviously Zeus pretty much right away. Like Kyria in his debut, you were talking about this guy as a top 3 top laner in the world, not just within the confines of the LCK. And I think Kyria, this was his first of a couple MVPs that he picked up on that SKT lineup. Number 5 biggest moment to talk about is it's not an actual specific match. It's more era-defining moment and change within the LCK. Because you remember before the GenG, even the Samsung, the LCK, OGN back then, in 2014, you could have a sister team, right? We had Samsung Blue, we had Samsung White, we had SKT T1K and SKT T1S. 2015 rolls around and the LCK changes format. Teams are only allowed 1 team per organization banner, which means we go 2 very different paths for these 2 storied organizations. Samsung blows up the roster. The Samsung White, Samsung Blue blows up. A lot of the guys go over to the LPL. SKT goes a very different path and amalgamates their 2 organizations to make a super SKT team that has their most dominant split ever in 2015, and Samsung goes to the bottom of the LCK standings, doesn't even make playoffs in either 2 splits, and this was a big fork in the road for the 2 organizations.
It's incredible that, again, you can have this direction change so much from these choices that these organizations made, and then all of a sudden 2016, we're back in the finals together. 2017, You're in the finals
together. Only 1 year, but 1 year that Samsung org was at the bottom.
Yes, and certainly also even looking back at that 2016 World Championship, I don't think anybody had the expectation that that was a Samsung team that was going to go the distance, that would be able to push T1 to Silver Scrapes in that deciding finals. When you're looking back at this decision, it is a crazy one, especially for some of our more modern viewers to understand what type of landscape it was in the LCK to have these sister teams, the type of strategies and roles that your sister team would play as far as preparing your main squad, and whether it was your main squad or you shifted focus to that sister squad, all sorts of things that would go on within the LCK within that type of structure. No more changed, and obviously has been an incredibly different landscape since then that we have navigated and grown from within the LCK.
And obviously it was very different. There were SKT members that was part of this exodus. Most of the Samsung organization went to the LPL. Guys like Deft, guys like Pawn had huge impacts over there. Guys like Impact and Piglet, well, where were they headed? It was 2015, a little LCS journey for them.
Also, as well, you can kind of look at some of the differences with that roster exodus in that regard by seeing, okay, Samsung, you're blowing up the teams type of things, and these guys go cash out. They get those contracts. They're taking that move to other regions, where for the most part, yes, Impact, there are examples within the SKT one. For the most part, they identified who were the key players. What is what we want to keep and build around? Namely, someone by the name of Faker in the mid lane was a very important one to keep around in the organization.
Well, they had to do it in 2015 because they were only going to get a couple years left out of him before he retires, right? Oh, we're a decade later. My man's still going.
Still going strong, still the GOAT of it all. But yeah, I think that's one of the big ones when I look back on that, when you think of who had been within that Samsung, that GenG family, and then where they go off to in comparison to SKT, who is able to keep that control and really the main power player in Faker.
We pivot back onto the Rift for the number 4 biggest moment, and it's some revenge for GenG. After that spring finals we just talked about, the undefeated T1 run wasn't quite undefeated, a pedestrian 17-1, 35-5 game score for GenG in the 2022 summer finals. And this is the emotional swinging of the pendulum. Chovy and Ruler and Lehens all emotional, picking up their first domestic LCK title. Even Score was the head coach, a guy who denied Chovy one of those titles back in 2018. But this really felt like a cathartic win for GenG, for guys that have been questioned in the most important matches for so long. And not only do they do it in a clean, dominant 3-0 fashion to kind of cement this new era of LCK.
And I think there's something about the Samsung GenG organization that just has to capitalize these moments with 3-0 series against T1. Talk about that one. This is a fantastic moment for the LCK, and I think one of these ones where it's not the smooth transition of the effortless DJ on the dance floor blending songs together. This is that one song finishes and we're jumping to a totally different genre. You're hearing the skip, the break in between the songs and everything, because that's what it is. It is this jump between where we had the LCK, what you had known, where T1 is this established top dog. You will have challengers, but this is the very top, to now the new era of the LCK, where it is an open playing field at that top. It is no longer this dominant dynasty of T1. You need to prove yourself. And if you are not fit enough to be the top dog on the leaderboard, you're not going to be there. And that's the way GenG approached this split, this whole playoff run, and specifically this championship matchup against T1. You mentioned it, guys like Score getting that taste of the championship, getting to lift that trophy really is a significant moment for a lot of people. But for me specifically, this is a key moment, a key shift in the tone, the sound of the LCK, that GenG has arrived and they are going to be one of the top dogs.
And were for a long time. This wasn't like a one-off series. This is the first of what is 4 LCK titles in a row for Mr. Chovy. And by the way, since Chovy joined GenG, his numbers, the team's numbers, are absolutely insane. This 2022 year is when he joins GenG. All he's done is rack up those 4 LCK titles, a couple of MSI titles, a couple LCK MVPs, and during this stretch, a 74, if you round up, 75% win rate. This isn't like one split. This is 3+ years. I don't think people understand how insane winning 3 out of 4 matches you play across 3 years is unheard of.
Absolutely bonkers. Absolutely crazy. Because again, you're talking about what is on the other side of Summoner's Rift when you're doing those matches and what it takes and what they have accomplished, how they've carved themselves out. Yes, it is a significant one to keep track of. And I think that's one of those transactions, right? Chovy going to GenG that I don't think anybody really had any full doubts about. Sometimes you have a superstar make a move. There's that little sliver of doubt where you question whether this is really the move you got to make. This is the big one. There was never any doubt about that for GenG. And I think you have fully seen that paid off, and more so for the organization with Chovy leading the charge.
It continues to be good news for GenG for number 3 on this list. It might even be higher depending on how World Championship goes, with things pivoting, and that is the 2025 fresh in the mind mid-season invitational. Not only does GenG win in the finals, but they beat T1 in back-to-back series in Game 5 in dramatic fashion, and this is what feels like GenG reaching their final form. Chovy especially stepping into that leadership role for this squad.
I think this is one of the most impressive international performances, accomplishments, outside of just the prestige that a world championship brings to the table. You couldn't do any better than what GenG have accomplished throughout this one, carrying that perfect record from the LCK into this event and continuing to win best of 5 out of best of 5 out of best of 5 against the best of the LPL, the best of T1, and the best of T1 T1 after they've had a chance at you already and getting a rematch in this situation. This is a fantastic accomplishment for the organization, for the players that you laid out. Guys like Chovy really kind of taking another astronomical step in his career to step up as a leader, as that tip of the spear guy for the team. I think Ruler stepping back into the GenG lineup finally has a big exclamation point type of performance and thing that actually carries some significance, that does bring a full-on trophy and title along with it. Very much so impressed with this one, and I think that should go down again in a proper spot within the history of these contested rivals.
Yeah, it's really the one-up from that 2022 Spring T1 because they delivered at MSI and keep the perfection going. 18-0 regular season, perfect in the playoffs, and then now 23 best of series in a row, GenG, and counting going forward. So yeah, absolutely kind of the evolved form of what T1 was able to put together in that spring split. Don't worry, we swing back to the T1 side of things for number 2. We're going to 2024 Worlds, the semifinals. GenG looked like the most dominant team in the LCK. Back-to-back MVPs for Chovy. Even though they lose in the finals to Hanwha Life, I think people still expecting them as one of the favorites overall at this event, but they didn't account for the T1 international buff at Worlds as they take down GenG 3-1 in the semifinals. A comeback was in the making in this game 4 before Owner and the T1 boys really slammed the door on their rivals.
And I think from anything we have seen from GenG and T1 this time around at MSI, I think you can count your blessings if you're T1 that you are able to close that door, able to shut things down when you do and not go the full distance against GenG. This series is important, again, in that retrospect to looking back at 2025 and what we've just had at MSI and going, these two GenGs are not the same. They still might have come in with the same type of hype, same type of accolades, same type of things that you are highlighting of why they are a successful team, a team you should be fearing out on Summoner's Rift. But the action, the in-game performance, the energy, the emotion that you carry through it, you can go back and clearly see the difference between these two, where it looks like GenG is still almost like a fish out of water in that sense. And you look at where they are, how composed, how comfortable they are in these situations now, night and day. And so I only bring that up again because of how significant I think the change and evolution and growth is for the 2025 version that we were just talking about. But this is a big one, yes, for T1, because it still solidifies that when it comes down to it all, when you got to get it done on the international stage and you got to buckle it up and give it your best, T1 has got the horses in the stable to do so.
And this is, of course, the first time that these iterations of these rosters had ever met at Worlds. We know since that summer finals in 2022, GenG had dominated this matchup domestically, and in their, shortcomings in previous world championships, it wasn't T1 that did it to them. DRX, BLG, different squads. So people were, this is GenG's year. They finally match up against T1. They have their number. They should be going to finals, and T1 gets the level up, which makes it even more surprising and even a bigger moment in this rivalry.
And as we were talking earlier about the impressive record against T1 that Chovy has accumulated, I think that this was as well a very important learning lesson, a little, slap on the wrist from Faker himself, saying, look, you accomplish all these things, you can be fantastic, you can have my number in the LCK. It's a different beast when I'm on the world stage, when it's an international title on the line, and that's the type of tenacity, type of focus and preparation that you have to be able to bring. And on top of that, you need the courage to execute on your calls and decision-making. And I think that is, again, this type of learning moment, this type of setback for as accomplished an organization and roster, really, as that GenG iteration was, to learn that lesson and to see the fruits of it back here at number 3 for 2025 MSI run of GenG really is an impressive story to tie number 3 and number 2 together for me.
The back and forth of the last 3 years between these two has been an absolute treat, but the biggest moment has still got to go to the dismantling of a dynasty. We're going back to those 2017 finals. It's SKT and Samsung at this point, and again, you got to set the stage a little bit here. There was a one team, not just region, worldwide. This is a three-peat on the line for SKT. They have far and away been the best team over the last 3 years. Two-time MSI defending champions, even with the new roster, and even with cracks in the armor showing. You know, the Misfits series, RNG, they were pushed to the brink. This wasn't peak level T1 or SKT, but it still felt inevitable that they were going to win again. And the fact that Samsung beats them and beats them badly in a 3-0 was shocking.
Very shocking. I think it's the monkey paw of all monkey paws for me, because I go, okay, let me be in person for a T1 World Championship. Here you go. Enjoy your 3 games of Samsung Galaxy beating T1 in the Bird's Nest in Beijing. It was an incredible experience to be there for, but it is such a remarkable moment to remember just how unexpected it was that GenG was able to do that. And this isn't meant to be that GenG didn't prove themselves throughout this tournament as a top tier team, someone that could rise to the challenge of what monstrous expectations everyone had built T1 into. But you're looking as well as throughout this tournament, the plot armor, it seemed like 5 games a Galio for Faker against RNG, getting it done against Uzi in China. I couldn't believe it. And then you go into this one and you've got all the excitement of not just all the run that's been through the championships prior to it. You got international attention. You have people that love Hooney, Peanut. The names on this roster were big for T1, but it's an even bigger rise to the challenge from Samsung Galaxy on the day. I think one of the ones that gets forgotten all this story and all the names all around throughout this one, you got to be looking at, of course, Cuvée in the top side. I think played a fantastic series and really did put a number on Hooney throughout this one. And of course, Crown in the mid lane. Everyone is always going to be talking about this one. This is a big one for the series, looking at the Malzahar pick coming on through. And truly, the one way you can hold down the Demon King is the Malzahar ultimate.
And the biggest implications from this series is honestly afterwards, because you go into the dark ages of T1 after this, and 5 years until they get back to a World Finals, which is nothing for most teams, but for SKT, when you were accustomed to see them year in and year out, this taking down of the dynasty took a long time for them to bounce back. Obviously, they made another era and a whole new dynasty with a new roster, but the impacts were felt for years after this finals loss, and years to come, I imagine we'll be adding many more moments to this rivalry. But that is it today for Liga Unlock. Eric and Mark here with you. Absolute beauties. Thanks for hanging.